Welcome. That's loud. All right. My name is Dan Coonan. It's my great privilege to be the Commissioner and CEO of the ECAC, and this is our fourth Empowerment Series event. We're at Caldwell University. Thank you so much to Caldwell for allowing us to do this here. And it's streamed on 11 Next. 11 Sports is one of our new streaming partners. We're thrilled to be associated with them. So this will go out live, but it's also going to be packaged by them to be distributed by us later. We're thrilled to be talking about some of the really timely topics that we're all confronting in intercollegiate athletics these days. And we've got a stellar panel, and I'm excited that we got these folks to really dive into this today. So I'm going to ask them just real briefly, starting with you, Ivy, just tell us who you are, just a little bit for a minute about what you're about. And again, thank you so much for being here. And then we're just going to dive right in to mental health issues in intercollegiate athletics. All right?
Thank you. Hello, my name is Ivy Watts. I'm former student athlete at University of New Haven. I graduated in 2015. I was a track athlete, a sprinter, and I now run a mental health blog called Beautifully Simply You, where I talk about my experiences and my struggles with anxiety and depression and later on suicidal thoughts as an athlete, and really the stigma that kept me from talking about it. So really passionate about mental health now, so excited to be here.
It's great to have you. It is. All right.
Hello, everyone. Also happy to be here. My name is Missy Traversi. I'm the head basketball coach at Adelphi University in Long Island, New York. I'm going into my fourth year. Originally from Massachusetts, played Division I basketball at the University of Maine, and just eager to learn more about mental health and also provide my experience with you all today.
And both of those two were phenomenal student athletes as well. They're a little shy about that or modest about that, but had to mention that. All right, Sean.
Hi, everybody. Happy to be here. I wasn't good enough to be a student athlete, so I got into taping ankles. I'm a 21-year certified athletic trainer with 19 of those in the Division I collegiate setting. I'm now the Associate Athletic Director for Student Athlete Health and Wellness at Georgetown University.
Hi, good afternoon. My name is Blair Heinke. I'm a physician at Georgetown University. My resume is pretty long because I started out as a student athlete, interested in mental health and my own personal well-being, and then became a primary care doctor, family medicine, working with non-athletes and dealing with their health and mental health, and then primary care sports medicine through University of South Carolina, go Gamecocks, and then have been with Sean at Georgetown University as their primary care team physician for the past 6.5 years.
Great. And Dr. Fish, you want to introduce yourself real briefly?
Sure. Joel Fish is my name. I'm a licensed psychologist and sports psychologist from Philadelphia. Run the Center for Sports Psychology in Philadelphia. And I've had a chance to speak at over 300 universities nationwide, primarily on the area of student athlete and mental health issues. So in addition to a licensed psychologist and sports psychologist background, I hope I'll be able to add a national perspective to the conversation.
Great. Well, we do these events every so often, and when we decided to do this one and looked around for what topics would be the best, everyone said mental health. So I want to start by just defining the problem, because a lot of folks, even today, I don't think fully realize what we're dealing with. And Dr. Heinke, maybe do you want to say a little bit about the nature and extent, and anyone who wants to add, because I want to give people a sense of this is real and it's dominating intercollegiate athletics right now from an administrative standpoint, what to do, how to do it. But why don't you just help define the problem, and anyone else that can do that, please.
So mental health is really, it's defining all health. As a doctor, even in medical school, we knew that the mental health of a certain disease would affect how quickly you're going to heal. We see that in athletes who are injured. We see those in people that have pain and have other mental health issues. But really, at this point, I would say that I spend 60 or 70% of my time thinking about mental health. It has become something that is just an epic crisis everywhere, but definitely in the sports environment. And I really feel like anything that we can do to raise awareness of it and then try to start coming up with solutions. I would say that anyone who tells you they have it completely figured out is not being honest, because it seems like we just don't even know how to deal with the scope of the problem that exists right now in all parts of life.
And I think one of the most important things to say regarding mental health, if you want to, quote unquote, define it, is there really is no definition. How it presents is different from person to person, from athlete to athlete, from individual to individual. One of my primary focuses now, after being on these panel discussions and things with the NCAA for the last 5 years, saying we need to address the mental health of the student athletes, which I think the NCAA has gotten a pretty good handle on in terms of recommendations and things like that. The implementation of it, I think, Dr. Fish would agree that it's probably something that we still are tweaking. But I don't expect anybody to know how to take care of mental health issues just by recommendations in a blueprint that you give out. One of my passions right now is speaking about who's taking care of the caretakers, the administrators, the coaches, the teammates, everybody, the athletic trainers, the team physicians. When we have mental health crises on campus, many people see that as a one-time thing. I can tell you, we've had 3 suicide attempts on campus this year. Those are things that take weeks and months of preparation to get planning down to adequately care for those individuals. But the toll that it takes on the administrators, the teammates, the coaches, is something that needs to be addressed as well. And I think that's the only way we can break down the stigma of how this is going to progress.
If I can add, I'm thinking of anxiety, stress, depression, some of the mental health issues that come to my attention. And the question I get a lot is, well, has this been there, or is this a new phenomena? And I believe that anxiety, stress, depression, it's always been there. It's just getting more emphasis now. But I do think competition in 2019 is different than it was 10 years ago, 20 years ago, 30 years ago. We could be having the same conversation at the high school level. We could be having it at the middle school level, at the elementary school level. And so I do think in terms of trends, competition, winning, being number one, is a cultural phenomena, and student athletes and mental health issues is an outgrowth of that, is part of. But for us to really understand the issue, I think we have to look at its roots, which is cultural. And what interests me, too, is that we could be having this conversation in any part of the whole country, Montana, Florida, Maine, California. Some trends tend to be regional, I would suggest, but this is a national trend, and that's why I really appreciate having the opportunity to address it in this kind of forum.
Sure. So as we define the problem, this beast of a problem that we're all looking at, anyone care to attach percentages of what percentages perhaps of students that you're seeing have either on medication or perhaps should be on medication or should be seeing someone? Or what percentage are we talking about that are maybe somehow afflicted by this type of problem?
Yeah, I think Ivy could give good perspective on this. I think one of the things that we get kind of pigeonhole ourselves in is this is a Division I issue with the stress of Division I athletics. I'm quite sure that every time Ivy lined up to race, she had no different mindset than somebody at Auburn or Alabama or one of those schools that produces national champions every year. Ivy's mindset was she wants to kick the butt of the person that she's racing against. And if she doesn't, how can she get to that? So I think percentage-wise, kind of piggybacking off of what Dr. Fish said, it's there for everybody. We just create a perfect storm for that to be kind of, if we could nurture mental health, what better way than to put a rigorous academic course load, expectation of success in athletics, and a social life that has to be perfect on Twitter or Instagram to be able to express yourself as a person. And I think that's where the clouded, definitions come from, is how can we identify, and do we have the resources once those are identified to take care of that person?
Yeah, I can agree with that. I think that the stress is there for everybody. I think, every division, there's stress there. There's that expectations, and I think a lot of it comes back to how you grew up. Like, if you expected yourself, like I did, to expect everyone to think that you're perfect, and for myself to have all those expectations on myself to be perfect, and then to constantly be beating myself down and having those mental health issues. But really having those resources on campus, but then also how do you have those conversations in a team dynamic, and how do people feel like they're able to have those discussions? Because I think particularly at our school, we never had a culture where we could talk about mental health. So I think a lot of it just is recognizing that everyone has some sense of stress, everyone has some sense of mental health struggle that they're going through. I think that helps a lot. But I think to the percentage issue, it's across all athletes, it's across all people.
Right. Coach, are you seeing that as well?
And I just want to speak on the social media phenomenon
Yeah.
that is, I'm sure the coaches here today can agree, it's an animal that's hard to control these days, from an individual setting, a group setting. It's hard for coaches, I believe, again, this is my perspective, I think it's hard for us to manage expectations and also create an open, safe space where you can talk about personal issues, struggles, because there is a stigma associated with admitting that there's something wrong or that you have an issue. And as a head coach, you wanna create that space and have that dialogue, but at the same time, there's so much we don't know. And I feel like it's constantly, you're hesitating and you're hedging and you're not sure if you're supposed to say the right thing. So I'm learning as I go. The college game has changed tremendously since I played. It's all a learning process for me right now, and it helps when we do create open space with the student athletes and they feel like they can come in and talk to you, and you get to build that relationship and you learn more about what they're struggling with. But it's the athletes that don't say anything. It's the athletes that don't have that energetic personality, and you can't always read them, that you worry about the most. And sometimes as coaches we want to dig and we want to try to find, and a lot of the times you just have to let them come to you. And again, I'm learning, I'm still growing, but it's a conversation I'm glad we're having. I'm glad that I had a chance to listen to Carrie Fagan. She's the author of What Made Maddie Run, tremendous book. I heard her speak at the Final Four a couple years ago and opened my eyes. It was chilling. And I recommend that book to any of the coaches, any of the student athletes. Again, it's What Made Maddie Run, and it opened my eyes to things I was doing well and maybe I could do better. So that's kind of where I'm at. But the social media does not help us in any way.
So let's, and I want to get to some of the others, there was a lot there.
Yeah.
I want to get to some of the other stuff in a second here, but while you brought up social media, so you obviously see social media as contributing to anxiety or the competition maybe that Dr. Fisher was talking about, that competition to be what everyone else is on social media maybe, so is that the case? And secondly, do you do anything about it? Do you talk to your team about it? Are there ways that you try to get at that, knowing that could be a contributing factor?
I think from my end, I think Ivy brought it up, just the perfectionist image that we all try to portray, that everything's perfect and we look a certain way and we have the greatest job and the greatest family life. I think, let's be real, none of us do. And let's talk about that. But it's edgy. It's hard to do that. And I think that's hard in sports because, again, it's looked at as a weakness, when really it's just a conversation. It's a real one.
If I can add to, I'm sorry.
Go ahead, Dr. Fish.
Joel, please. And what you're saying there, I do believe anxiety, stress is across the board, like we were saying before. And again, if I look back 10, 20 years, I think the needle has moved where more people are having this conversation. The NCAA is prioritizing it. Kevin Love, some others at the pro level have come out, and I think that's normalized it. The one piece that I still think, and I'm interested in what people say, that makes student athletes a little different, or is another challenge for them to talk about it, is that in my experience, a term that has been, or a term that student athletes over the years have not want to be called or labeled is soft or weak. And so the student athlete, I believe, has a unique challenge. Can I really show my vulnerability? Can I really say I'm hurting? And can I really trust that my coach, who might be giving me a message, is giving me a consistent message? You can tell me that. I have an open door policy. Come on in and help me. And if I hear that from you, at some level, I won't file it away and define it as weakness, soft, another term, which in athletics is not a very valued term. And so I think the work among student athletes and coaches and administrators is to give a consistent message. We do want you to walk through that open door, be honest with us, and we see that as a strength. That it's another part of player development, if you will, emotional as well as physical. That, to me, is what we need to still do a better job at.
You know, nationally, when I speak, it's mostly as the unintended consequences guy. Whenever there's compliance issues or rules voting at school, I'm the guy that kind of brings in the unintended consequences of how we, implement some things. One of the unintended consequences of social media, I think, and in my personal opinion, this isn't studied or published that I know of, but it's not the expectation of what that person thinks they should be. It's the expectation of what that person thinks their parents, their friends, society thinks they should be. And I think that's a real important distinction to understand, that the instant gratification that social media offers isn't real life. There's processes and progress that has to be made to get an A in a class. It doesn't happen instantly. There's processes and progress that has to be made for you to be able to win that 400 race when you line up for it. It doesn't happen on the first race you line up to. But I think what we've conditioned with social media is if you don't get that instant gratification, then there's something wrong with you. So we might not be creating mental health issues, I would say, but we're certainly contributing to them when we enable that instant gratification behavior. The unintended consequence of that is, in my opinion, and the question that we still have to maintain is, how do you hold somebody accountable? And I think that's something that I struggle with on a day-to-day basis. If a kid has an ACL tear and doesn't show up for therapy, that's an expectation. How can I hold them accountable with not offending them, with not giving them one of the buzzwords? There's certain things that have to be non-negotiable. Inclusivity, respect, professionalism, caring. In sports medicine terms, I can't stand athletic trainers that say, I have to go cover practice. You're caring for student athletes. And if we can separate those lines of delineation and say that care is what we're here for, not mental health care, care of the whole body, person, mind, body, spirit, which is something that we are drilled into at Georgetown with the Jesuit philosophies. But I think that personally, morally, that's what our obligation is. That's what our charge is. I don't get fired for wins and losses. Coaches do. But if I can be the advocate for that student athlete to get to where they need to be, almost unequivocally their performance will enhance.
I think social media is tough because, somebody who uses it a lot and struggle with the comparison piece is you're looking at how many likes am I getting on this photo, and looking at how many people have followers, like how many followers another person has compared to you, and I think it goes back to that perfection piece. People aren't posting that they're just crying the other night. Like I mentioned, I run a mental health blog, so I'm posting a lot of positivity on there, and I try to be open about my own personal struggles, but if you just scroll through my page, you would just see like happy photos if you don't read the captions, and that's a lot of times what people will do. They'll just see see what's on the outside, and they won't post, last night I had an anxiety attack, last night I had a mental breakdown. And so people aren't seeing what's happening beneath the surface. And I think that's like a whole other issue that is like a cultural issue that would have to be broken down, but I think we always have to remember that we're more than a social media page. And I think back to your point about that just open culture, I always thought it would have been important to have, day one when we had our welcoming meeting and going into college athletics, having an open space or having a former athlete come and talk about their own personal struggles, or just saying like, this is an open space that we want you to come here if you're struggling with mental health, and this is what we'll do for you if so. Rather than just saying like, you're here to run X, Y, and Z time, and you're here to jump this distance and all of that. So instead of just focusing on the entire athletic piece, I think it would have been helpful, particularly for me as a student athlete, to have that space from day one that we focus on mental health. I was telling Missy that when I drove up here today, I saw a sign that said this is a stigma-free campus, and I think just coming here, if I was on tour for looking at different colleges and coming here and seeing that this is a stigma-free campus, the campus is focused on breaking down the stigma around mental illness, maybe I would have felt a little bit more comforted that I could be open because I know there's someone here that's going to listen to me and not just tell me to suck it up if I'm struggling. Yeah.
Right. You raised the question of how do we know if someone's going through this? I know we talked about sometimes the loudest voices are about, I'm struggling today, might be somebody that doesn't necessarily have a mental health issue, but maybe they've flunked a class or they're struggling with a date, but this person who is struggling month in and month out might not be a loud voice crying for help. How can you determine that? How can we as administrators get to those folks and figure out, okay, there's a need here?
You want to go first?
Go ahead. No, please.
Okay. So I think that we are all struggling every day. We all are struggling with something. The question is, who is struggling in a way that they, when you think of an addiction, someone who's addicted to alcohol or whatever, one of the ways that we define it in medicine is it somehow negatively affecting your life? If you're struggling, but then, you get knocked down, but you get back up, I would count that as a positive struggle. I would count that as learning to be an adult, and it's hard. It's going to make you cry. It's going to be terrible. But then there are other people who are falling down and they're not able to get back up. And they may be able to fake that they got back up. They may be able to post a picture online. They may be able to laugh or make a joke about something, but they are truly not getting back up. And over time, they're being knocked down again and again. And those are the people that I think we have to identify, because oftentimes if they're not able to get back up, it's because they truly do have something that is a mental health issue that needs more professional care. And so I think it's important to not just see what somebody's doing on the outside, but try to hear what they're saying and read the captions of their life and try to see, reading between the lines. And then if you have a concern about somebody, trying to bring it to the attention of somebody who can do something. A lot of times teammates try to intervene, and I think and coaches try to intervene. And I think that they're the ground forces for doctors like me, and even the athletic trainers are oftentimes on the front lines, but I'm not a psychologist. They need to, there are people that really need to get to the right place. And so I think that when we have a concern about somebody, trying to read between the lines, and then if that concern is confirmed in a way, then escalating it to the person that you think could help. Even if that's not the final person, maybe they can then escalate it to somebody like Dr. Fish, who can really, help somebody who's been knocked down so much that they are now depressed or suicidal or having negative effects on their lives.
Just to add to that, I think some really good work has been done in helping teammates help other teammates to get to the best person and best resource. I can't tell you how many people in the last year said to me, well, how do I know whether my teammate, my friend, my roommate, my family member, team language, is going down the wrong road? We're down the continuum, anxiety, stress, depression. It's a matter of degree. We all have a bad day. And so what I found is, and what I've been doing more, is just giving criteria to teams by which to assess one of their teammates may be in trouble. Alcohol dependence. Do they know someone who has a definite pattern of drinking? There's been an increase in the pattern of drinking. It used to be 2 cans of beer, now it's beer and hard liquor. Significant changes in eating habits, sleeping habits. Usually comes to me, so-and-so just isn't himself or herself anymore. I think there's good work when we give student-athletes, teammates, criteria by which to assess their teammate may be going down the wrong road. That's a good step one towards nipping the problem in the bud or getting them to someone who might be able to help them. And the second part is, and I know this is where I've been trying to concentrate on, there were so many people this year that said to me, well, I knew my teammate was going down the wrong road, I just didn't know what to say. In helping student-athletes, teammates who really care, learn how to have those difficult conversations. I see you drinking that 3rd, 4th, and 5th can of beer. I feel, I want, I will, what we call the 5 I's. I think in terms of a strategy, we're able, when we educate teammates who know what's going on Thursday, Friday, Saturday night way before we do, oftentimes, the criteria, how to have the conversation, increase the chances someone who cares is going to reach out, and makes it less likely someone's going to, if you will, fall through the cracks and just keep dealing with things without somebody knowing. So that's, to me, a response to your question about what we can do.
Right.
Yeah, and I think if I can add something to that, again, I'm kind of the unintended consequences guy, but what we've seen with the destigmatization of mental health issues is a spike in the seeking out resources for those issues. You better be sure that you have the infrastructure in place to take care of that once you identify what's going on. And if you don't, it has to be an overnight snap of the finger type addressing by the university or college or high school or whatever setting we're talking about here. I think one of the things that's often overlooked is the toll that takes on those people who are the caretakers of their teams, the captains, the ones that everybody go to for that support when they're having a rough day, and the toll that takes on that person's mental health and how it can negatively affect that person, but also the rest of the fabric of the team. So, when we're dealing with these major issues and things with an individual, it's not usually just isolated to that one individual. It's then becoming a systemic issue within the team. Whether or not that's something that we need to address right away is something that is up for discussion. But oftentimes, it is something that kind of festers underneath the surface and then boils over at certain points, and we have to have a way to address that as well, which is the things that Dr. Fish talked about in terms of educating your teammate, destigmatizing and things like that. Those are all great things that we want to reinforce, but again, we have to have a plan in place to kind of make sure that when it does boil over, we don't have 4 issues instead of 1.
And to what degree with privacy concerns, so let's say somebody did come forward and let's say they said they had suicidal thoughts, and to what degree can you even bring the team in, bring the coach in, depending on maybe the coach receives that information, maybe a team doctor receives that information, and ideally, maybe you'd love to engage everyone as how best to take care of this, but you might not be able to, perhaps. Can you talk to, that's got to be a challenge and a struggle.
The HIPAA rules apply to, so in university institutions, there's HIPAA and there's FERPA. Not many people think that FERPA contains medical information, but it actually does. So teachers aren't allowed technically to, communicate with a parent that calls and says, hey, how's my kid doing in class, or how are they feeling, with their depression or anxiety, without an authorized release. But one of the things that we can do is just this. These panel discussions at every university, destigmatizing, educating, and giving a resource pamphlet. What we do at school, we have a mandatory once a semester meeting, and we take hot topics, just like mental health is almost always up there. And we'll say, you know, if you see a teammate struggling or something like this, it's anonymous, it's whatever you need it to be. There's certain things that are non-negotiable: sexual assault and threat to harm themselves or others. Those are things that I have to report as a athletic trainer at our institution. But outside of that, we can give our Jesuit institution has an LGBTQ center on campus. These are things that you can go if you're having some identity crisis issues or sexual orientation, you know, type of things. Sexual assault, this is where you go on campus. Title IX, here it is. And we just simply distribute that, and they put a face to a name with Dr. Heinke or Dr. Fish or Missy as the coach or Ivy as a teammate. There's student-athlete mentoring programs across this country where certain members of each team are picked out to be trained on how to deal with this. There's the, Dr. Fish will give me the correct term of this, but the mental health awareness training for coaches and administrators. QPR, is that what it is?
QPR.
Yeah. Is that what it,
The QPR is suicide prevention.
correct. So there's suicide prevention, but there's also a mental health awareness certification that you can get as a you know, practitioner to say, hey, these are the things that we need to be aware of, and these are the resources if they were to be you know, and just having those hard conversations. I think one of the beauties of athletics is if we can get Dr. Heinke in front of our 700 student athletes at school, it's a face to a name, and there's instant comfort to be given outside of the coach, outside of a teammate, outside of a psychologist. You know, nobody wants to go to the shrink, you know, but if it's a doctor, you know, that's something that they can really kind of latch onto. They've been seeing doctors their whole lives and things like that. So,
But can you, so if someone comes forward and they have someone like Dr. Heinke to, which is a very soft landing for someone, okay, great, we can, there's someone who cares, who is associated with the university, but can she then alert the coach, or, you know, there's nothing, so what you're limited to is connecting with the student themselves and asking them maybe to reach out to others, perhaps. I'm not trying to put words in your mouth, but.
So, and I'm sure you feel this way as well, Dr. Fish. So when someone tells me something as a doctor, it is something that I keep secret unless it is something where I think they may actually kill themselves or kill someone else, which luckily doesn't happen very often to me, probably more to you. But so you know, you really want them to feel like they have a confidentiality and that things are safe, it's a safe place. But one of the first things that I do is try to recruit help for myself. And so trying to find out who that person may trust, and hopefully saying, you know, what about your parents, what about your coaches, what about your teammates, who are your friends, who do you talk to about this? Those are people that I'm trying to identify and seeing if we can pull them into the conversation, because if we are able to get some things out in the open, it's helpful for the entire team. But, you know, that is a complaint. We have a coaches summit at the beginning of the year where we talk about mental health. It's a 2-day thing that our athletic director put together, and you know, we talk about limitations of mental health, and our coaches say again and again, how can you not tell me that I have someone who's struggling with depression on my team? I'm yelling at these kids. I'm telling them to run faster, try harder, which is what you're supposed to do as a coach. How can you not tell me? And it's a really big struggle, but I think that you know, it's part of what mental health, you know, it's one of the limitations of mental health. And I even encounter it when we have someone inpatient in a psychiatric ward. I'll go and I'll say I'm their primary team doctor, and I won't be able to get the information. So we really do have a level of secrecy about things that is important. For one hand, a confidentiality to make people feel comfortable, but it does hamstring us in a lot of ways, and I know it frustrates coaches and athletic trainers when I say I can't tell you, but I don't think that's an easy answer. I think it makes mental health even more difficult because you're not able to include the people that love these kids the most. But yes, that is a problem.
And also, I'm sure there's a myriad of reasons why different reasons why someone might be going through this. One of them might be difficulty with their own expectations of where they should be in their sport. And maybe sometimes a relationship with a coach might make that worse, perhaps, if they're not playing and they view themselves as being worthy of a starting position and the coach doesn't, or if it's a coach that happens to be a tough coach, like some of the best coaches are really tough coaches, and that complicates it, I would think, even more. Anybody want to talk about that particular issue?
I just
hoping
want to,
you would say something.
Yeah, I just want to bring up the Izzo issue as of late.
Yeah.
Right,
I think it's a great, great conversation to have.
Yep.
So I printed off the article and I sent the YouTube clips to my team. And similar to what you did, we actually had discussion about it in the locker room. And I said, I don't need to read these, but I want you to tell me, are you for this? Are you against this? The issue of accountability, how some would say he screamed right in the face of the freshman. And he did, on the outside looking in. And how would you respond in that situation? So we asked each athlete on the team, and I was actually blown away by the responses. They wanted me to read them, and our assistant coaches read them, and they all were for it. They all were for it. But I don't know if that's true, truthfully. I don't know, because the accountability piece is that fine line as a coach. So I would like to bring that up on the panel and see what your thoughts are. We opened the door for a conversation. We had it. I don't know if they were fully honest about it. So.
Yeah, I mean, I think the bottom line is this is my 21st year doing this. I spend probably more time with my student athletes than I do with my own family. And I'm sure, Missy feels the same way a lot of times as well. But usually the athletic trainer is the first person they come to when they're having issues. Our athletic director says all the time, it might be the first time you get a B. Might be the first time you ask somebody on a date and they say no. You're small fish in a big pond at this point. The easy answer to the Izzo thing is that was fine for that kid at that time. But if you catch him 3 days later when he failed a test and his girlfriend dumped him and you do that, that might be a very different conversation of him in the press conference coming out and saying, I support Coach Izzo for how he holds me accountable. 3 days after and those other things happen, he might be like, he contributes to a poor mental health. It's a toxic environment. It's hostile. It's bullying. And I think there's a very fine line that we walk now in terms of trying to feel out those 15 personalities on the court every day and where they're at. We also have to remember that these kids are social beings, they're academic beings, they're athletic beings, they're somebody's son, daughter, some of them have children of their own at this young age, that they have things that are outside of what any of us could imagine at the time we see him as a basketball player on the court playing in the Final Four. Right. To be frank, I think that's probably why Izzo's as successful as he is, because he recruits kids that can handle that. The problem becomes when you recruit a kid that you don't identify as being able to handle, or you think can handle that, and you find out later can't. And that's evolving.
Yeah, and I think that's the most challenging part of my job, is finding out what each athlete is motivated by, what makes them tick. Beyond their strengths and weaknesses, evaluating them in totality, who they are, their spirit, what are they excited about, what sets them on fire, and that continues to be an onward struggle from my perspective.
So do you coach differently? So let's say you have a quote-unquote tough as nails kid, and you've got another one that's like eggshells and maybe just lost a boyfriend, maybe just lost a parent, or has cancer in the family somewhere, or do you coach differently those two kids?
I would say when I first started out, when I was a really young coach, I coached one way. And and it was hard-nosed, it was tough, it was edgy, because that was my experience. And as I've grown and I've experienced through failure at times, that's not the right way. And I've opened myself up to different cultures and different ways to instruct. I believe the best teams are led by players themselves, not coaches. So being able to, we create a leadership council. We have players being involved with tough conversations, as opposed to the coach always being the hammer, having the players actually police what goes on. And I think that's helped us over the years. But it's an onward journey, for sure.
I'm sure.
And one of the things I'll say about, coaching, and Missy might agree or disagree with this, is you can't expect your kids to be vulnerable if you're not vulnerable as yourself. So for her to admit that she's changed the way she's coached and things like that, I think is a big step in the right direction for her. I think Izzo is a vulnerable guy. I think he shares intimate, personal things with his team. He's not this, and forgive me for being the wordsmith, but we can't use words like mental toughness at Georgetown anymore. It's emotional durability and resiliency. And those are for the reasons that we don't want to seem soft. There is a vulnerability of me expressing to our student athletes that I've been in counseling for 9 years myself. So when I say it's something that I am passionate about, it's truth being told. It's me opening myself up to that vulnerability and things like that. Blair is a mother to every one of our 700 student athletes in a way that, we're getting older, Blair, whether we want to admit it or not. But used to be the older brother and sister, but now, but allowing yourself that vulnerability and then to have them kind of feed off of that and say, oh, this is a 45-year-old guy that's been in counseling for 9 years. I tell every kid, if I was in at 18, I wouldn't be spending as much money as I am right now doing it now. It's much harder to do it later in life, in my opinion. So for you to have these resources and things like that, I think you need to take advantage of it if that's something that you choose to do. But being vulnerable with your student athletes and giving them that voice to say, is this something you could respond to instead of just being the hammer all the time, I think is really important. It might be that she has 12 girls they're young ladies that respond to that. She doesn't have to change her style one bit. Next recruiting cycle might be a different story.
It's an interesting question, Missy. I would suggest that the odds are, in response to your question, small, that everyone is all the same personality type. Some of them may not know the answer to the question, But I've worked a lot at the pro level, too, and at every level. And this could be football, this could be basketball, it could be tennis, golf. There's been a range of personality types. Some need this, maturity level's different. But I'm not surprised that in a public context, with the coach there, that folks would still err on the side of saying, I like that. And part of that is what I think they learn. But real quick story, I remember I had a football quarterback in Wisconsin where I went to school many years ago, who was a starting quarterback, almost led Wisconsin to the Rose Bowl, which back then would have been like a Little League team winning the World Series. They hadn't been very good. And he could play in front of 70,000 people and be the center of attention. I had him in an intro to psych class, and you had to give a 5-minute talk on some aspect of psychology. It was in a room like this with this number of people. And after 2 minutes, he couldn't do it. Anxiety attack, he had to sit down. I said, help me understand this. You can play in front of 70,000 people, be the center of attention, but you have a hard time getting up in front of 15 people. And he said, Joel, people are always making these assumptions. Just because I'm big and strong and confident in one part of my life, they assume I'm big and strong and confident in every other part of my life, and I'm not. I'm not comfortable being a vocal team leader the way coach wants me to be. I'm not comfortable walking around campus. People know who I am. I don't know who they are. I'm not comfortable doing public speaking. Here's a fellow that started to go down the road with alcohol that I know that he didn't want to go down, and part of the reason I would suggest is these expectations. Oh, he's big and strong in this area. He must be A, B, C, D in another area. And so to have the conversations with the team, I think is really important. But what a great opportunity we have in that 18 to 22 to help students learn more about themselves, their identity, what areas they're confident in, what areas they're not. They may change, so maybe it's the center of their universe their freshman year, but it's a nice activity their junior year. And I think all this has impact on how they how comfortable they feel in coming to people like us and saying, you know how I feel, I'll tell you how I feel. You have that open door, I'll come through the open door and I'll be honest with you. I just think these are all factors to how many people come through that open door and how honest they can be.
And you know, one of the things I'll say, you know, we talk about a lot about Kevin Love kind of being the poster child for this. We talk about how terrifying what made Maddie run was. You know, Missy and I were talking about that earlier. But I think probably if everybody went back and looked in the history of sport, the first person that really brought this that I related to was Ricky Williams. And if people don't know the story, I mean, I'm getting really old when I say this, but Ricky Williams was a guy who was perceived just to want to smoke weed. But he had a personality disorder that didn't allow him. The only way he was allowing himself to participate in sport was because he put a black visor over his face on his helmet and was able to be anonymous except for his name on the back of his jersey. If you watch the 30 for 30 on him, it's pretty fascinating how much of a social disorder or anxiety disorder he had and was still able to be one of the most productive running backs in the history of college football, and then become a pro that was pretty, you know, efficient at you know, bringing up stats as well. But that was the one thing that really resonated with me, that said, this isn't fake. You know, this kid just doesn't want to smoke dope. He's got an issue that he's trying to deal with, and he's self-medicating. And Dr. Fish and Dr. Heinke can tell you, the self-medication now is the thing that's the scariest for us. The opiate abuse that we have going on now, the marijuana legalization in many states, alcohol, binge drinking. And I want to touch on that a little bit in terms of these team rules that we have. A lot of these team rules pigeonhole ourselves into having one 24-hour period where they're allowed to participate in alcohol consumption. You know, 48-hour rule. Well, when you're playing two or three games a week, there's one 24-hour period where you're allowed to do that. So what do you think you do? You go out instead of 2 beers, you have 22 beers, and you end up in the emergency room getting your stomach pumped and trying to beat up one of the orderlies in the ER. Those are things that I think, contribute or enable those types of things, instead of having the real conversations, what's the responsible way to go about this? And I think that's where the struggle is. With the time demands that the NCAA has now, we can't continue to ask these kids for these educational seminars and expect them to do well in their sport and well in school and well in their social life when we're saying sit in front of this panel for the next 45 minutes 3 times a month to make sure we know where you're at for those, for that hour. So that's kind of the juggling thing that we do.
Well, I don't want to leave the tough coach yet. So do you see that as part of a contributing factor to some of the anxiety and depression, or not? And do you think, especially, I was at a Jesuit school, and there any parent of an athlete that felt that the coach was being too tough, you'd get a letter, and the president would get a letter and say, I can't believe at a Jesuit school you allow this to happen. Do you think with the mental health being such that more in focus, that coaches like that are going to go the way of the dinosaur, or not? Do you think there's still a role for it, a place for it? And how do you think that'll go forward in 10 years, do you think?
So I think everyone is different. And so I think that there's nothing wrong with being a tough coach, but there's something wrong with never admitting that you're wrong. So I don't, luckily, thank God, have to make any play calls or do any sort of, we're going to do this drill to make you a better athlete. But I tell people, you take this medicine, you go to the pharmacy, wait in line, buy it, take it, and you'll get better. But I'm not always right. I can't possibly be always right when I prescribe a medicine, or I prescribe a treatment plan, or I don't prescribe a medicine. And when I'm wrong, I have to continue to take care of that person. I have to admit that I'm wrong. I have to come up with another plan. And then the next time that person gets sick, I have to think of a different way to approach it. And I think that that's probably what good coaches do, is that they adjust themselves to what their particular athlete needs. And sometimes a particular athlete may need a tough coach, even if it's hard. And I think that they probably are some of the best coaches that we have. And so I hope that they don't go away, because I was an athlete, and some of the hardest workouts I did in my life, I still am proud that I did. So I hope that we continue. We need that for sports, to have tough coaches, but we also need coaches that are willing to say, you know what, that was stupid, we shouldn't have done that, and that's my fault. And I think that probably you're one of those coaches that can say, I'm not perfect, and we're going to learn this together. I think there's a lot that people appreciate when you're willing to do that with them.
We also have to have student athletes that don't think they know the answer to everything either. I mean, I'm just going to
Or
put
parents.
it out there. Or parents.
Or administrators. Or fans.
Those are human
Yeah.
qualities. Yes.
Well, I think, and again, I think coaches are struggling with the reality that students and student athletes need discipline, they need structure. 18 to 22, that's how you help them grow, different maturity levels. But I do believe there is a line that we can help educate coaches on what's abuse, what isn't abuse, physical, verbal. And I think coaches, and I come up with a baseball background, played in college, coaches have, now you can be the psychologist, you can analyze me here, but I mean, I had a coach who used to say some pretty darn, what I think now is abusive things. Oh, I'm just trying to build mental toughness in you. I got to toughen you up. Coaches have had a really good cover, I think, all these years. I'm not abusing somebody. I'm just building mental toughness. I'm just, that's the way the real world is. Well, there is a line where I do think discipline and structure stop and being abusive starts. And that, to me, is where we have to continue to educate. But yet, educate coaches, understand that it's a tricky position where that line is may differ from person to person. And then, again, this is me, you can be interested in your thoughts, Missy, is that I think we have to give a more consistent message to coaches around this, too, which is, I don't see coaches at the level of Division I, II, or III being evaluated primarily on, are you producing well-rounded, holistic people who graduate? Predominantly, coaches are still retained or not retained by wins and losses. And at the end of the day, if there's a mixed message from administrators to coaches, we want you to do this, this is your responsibility, and yet the bottom line is really, well, that's all nice, your graduation rate, your mental health rate, but it's about wins and losses. I just think that puts coaches in a situation where they end up transferring that mixed message to the student athlete. It makes it less likely for the student athlete to walk in that open door.
So Ivy and Mitzi, maybe you guys can answer this better, but do you feel like that line where that spectrum is of tough or not, or abuse versus acceptable, is creeping towards the soft, parameters? And I'll go one step further and say there's a reason why there were over 900 student athletes in Division I basketball entered into the transfer portal last year. That's something that I think is a microcosm, a great study on social behavior to find out why that's happening at an unprecedented rate right now. The expectation to play immediately or to go one and done. The NBA's currently taking away talking about taking away the one and done rule. What's that going to do for a 17 or 18-year-old kid now that's going into that? So as a student athlete, I guess, and as a coach, you've already talked about that kind of being, some respond to it, some don't. I feel like that spectrum is shrinking in terms of accountability and how to effectively promote accountability. So.
Yeah. So I think one thing that comes to mind when you were just talking is that not everyone's going to always like you. There's going to be people that you just don't vibe well with. And I think it's important that you have those conversations with your athletes like you're doing, and what really works well for you, what coaching style works well for you. And sometimes it's not a good fit. And I think there is a fine line of, having that tough coach versus having somebody who can be adaptive to the different personalities. And it really goes off of what that student athlete needs. And I think just, for me personally, speaking about my own experience, having that suck it up mentality as an athlete wasn't conducive to what I needed. And I think it's important that, when you're having those conversations, there might be a student that falls under the radar because they have it all together, and that's exactly, what happened with me. Is you would have never expected somebody like me and like all these other, really great athletes that are now coming out openly about their mental health struggles. You would never expect them to be the people that are struggling, because when you look at them, you just see them as that great basketball player, or just the athlete, and you're not looking again like underneath the layers of all of it. So I think it's important that you have those conversations and just continually having those conversations. And I think when we do say suck it up, whether that's for a physical issue or a mental issue, it just really inhibits the conversations from happening that need to be happening. So I think that there's conversations that can be had, but I think there also needs to be a shift. I don't think we should take away from the tough coaching styles that people are accustomed to, but I think we have to have a different approach than just suck it up. And what is the best approach when someone is struggling? How can we best support that particular individual? And how you support that individual is going to be different how you support another individual. So I think coaches need to learn about the new guidelines that are out through the NCAA, but also implementing them, and how do you implement them, and just knowing that I can be the best coach possible by still being adaptive to all of my different athletes.
Great point.
Yeah, and the loosening of the transfer restrictions may absolutely impact this.
Floodgates, yeah.
But some people will say, what's wrong with somebody wanting to transfer? And what's wrong with somebody wanting to transfer just because they didn't start? That's fine. Anyone else can transfer to a different school too. So, but I understand why some coaches think, well, I'm going to lose control now I have to change how I coach. And
if I can, before I lose this thought, one of the things that I always ask our student athletes when they come in to me to complain, and complain's a bad word, to express wordsmith, express displeasure with where they're at. I'll listen to them, and I always, same with my own kids. I have 14 and 11-year-old daughters. I say, okay, I'm hearing you. How would you have rather that interaction have gone? And if they can't answer that, I stop the conversation there and I say, look, I'm not here to solve this problem. I'm here to help facilitate a solution. So if you can give me some constructive feedback on how you would have rather had that interaction go, or whatever, then we can continue the conversation productively, where I can then go. The beauty of coaches are, if you make it seem like it's their idea, they're all about it. If it's my idea, it's you don't know what you're talking about. So I think if we can somehow create a space where they're accountable for their feelings in a way that says, let me think about how that would have rather, or I would have rather had that interaction go, I think it's a much more productive conversation than me saying, okay, we're going to talk to the coach and they can't say that to you anymore. If that makes sense. I don't know if that makes sense to anybody, but it did in my head when I was...
Perspective.
Exactly, it's perspective. That was a really long-winded response for perspective.
Right. Some of your coaches might see this too, by the way.
And the transfer portal is brand new. I'm sure that some of the coaches here today have dealt with it. And just the last couple of years, we've seen a dramatic increase just with my colleagues, conversations with my friends who are coaching. Athletes will come in, they have 2 years left of eligibility, 1 year left of eligibility, and they understand they're not going to play, or possibly they've been recruited over. So they ask for their release. And my staff, we would give the athlete their release. I have heard coaches not give releases, and that creates a whole nother problem. But it's difficult though, because and I hate to say this, it's almost like Match.com, right? They put their name on a portal, they get an email back to social media, they get a hit or an email with a coach that's interested, and it's a reoccurring cycle. They want to feel validated. They want to feel like they're enough. And whether or not, Adelphi might not be a good fit, or they find another school, there's so many different dynamics that play into a student athlete transferring. It's not just an issue of mental health. It's not just an issue of playing time. There could be family crisis going on. And I think there's judgments that are made. I think there's There's just different dynamics that we all need to think about before we assume that people are transferring because of a mental health issue. So that's just something I wanted to bring up.
Absolutely.
And I think also how I just said that we often look at people as just an athlete. I think that was just a great point. And a lot of times, as for me at least, and I think a lot of my teammates, based our worth based off how we were doing and on the track, and based our worth being an athlete. So my entire life I was a track athlete. Once I finished track after college, I had no idea who I was, and that led me to struggle a lot. And so I think a lot of times too, what we can do with athletes, and when they come to us and they're talking about they don't have any sense of self-worth, like talking to them about how they can start implementing some of that self-worth, how can they start to learn to figure out other pieces about themselves that obviously make them worthy, because we aren't based off that one aspect of our lives. So I think it's important that we can also have those discussions with student athletes just to see what else they are outside of sports, because for many of them, they're not going to go on to be professionals. So what else about you brings you joy, and what do you add to this world that makes it beautiful, and what about you is beautiful? And I think having those conversations can add a lot of worth that when you do have to transfer schools, and that's a really difficult decision and you're struggling a lot with that you still have sense of worth while you're going through your day.
And if I can, and it gets back to the how-to, gives us an opportunity. This is a skill-building part, I believe, of sports psychology and other disciplines. Well, how do you suck it up? So, and suck it up, well, we have to teach the skills of how to handle stress better and manage positive self-talk, relaxation, focusing, mental preparation, visualization. I think sometimes we're telling student athletes, well, suck it up. Well, teach me the skills to do that. Or you need to relax, well, teach me the skills to do it. There's a skill building element to learning how to manage one's emotions and thoughts that I think this discussion can lead to, but I think is an important part of the discussion. Same thing with identity. How do you discover different parts of your personality? We need to allot time and need to teach them how to do that too. So there's a skill building component, I think, to what we're talking about also.
And Ivy hit the nail on the head here with identity, because where we've failed in athletics, in my opinion, at all levels, high school, collegiate, professional, is a transition to practice model. So Ivy knows that, at University of New Haven, Division II, she's probably not going to be an Olympic caliber runner to be able to make money, after she graduates in a sustainable lifestyle to support herself. But what did we do for 4 years to say, that's probably something that you need to prepare for as a freshman, sophomore, junior, senior, so that your identity isn't tied to the graduation day and being like, holy yes, who am I now? You take a 100-level biology course, and then a 200-level, and then advanced and doctorate, fellowships and residencies and things like that, where you're preparing yourself for a transition to practice. And I think where we failed immensely is transitioning these young men and women to be productive, contributing members of society, when for 4 years we've said, your worth is in the 400. Your worth is honor roll. You're a curve buster. You bring up the GPA on our team, and you score at regionals for us every year. That's where I think we've completely missed the boat. And if you look at the NFL, studies on head injuries and things like that, I would be very interested to find out how much of that is a lack of preparation into how to deal with life after football versus solely being blamed on CTE and head injuries and things like that. And I'm not getting into a debate on whether or not that's true. That is an absolute fact of what goes on in those people's brains. I'm saying simply that if we blanket everything and say that it's because of CTE, I don't know that that's the right narrative to push out there. And I think a lot of it is relating to identity after sport.
We'll address that at a future Empowerment Series event. By the way, if there's any questions at any point, please let us know. So how best can we get it? You talk about skill building, and I just know from my time at schools that the education you're doing with student athletes on so many issues. You're bombarding them. Here's the NCAA rules that you now have to apply, and here's everything you need to know about gambling and sexual assault and alcohol abuse, and you name, and managing your time. And all of those are really critical conversations and things you're trying to impart to students when they come to you, when they leave their home for the first time, and you fold in these, how to deal with mental health and how to address it, and then maybe how to see it among your teammates. And all of it can get lost, by the way, in some of those meetings when they're away from home for the first time and their head is spinning. But what's the best way if resources weren't a problem? The NCAA athletics generates enormous resources, and it'll take a lot to restructure maybe how that gets allocated, but let's assume that at some point it can be, and mental health can really be dealt with. What would you do? Where would you start? What do students need, and how could we best serve them?
I mean, I can tell you where I think we start, and it's a complicated question, but I've been trying for a while to just get coaches, because I think we do have time for it. And I don't think it's a resources issue. It's how teams allocate their practice time. I've been just trying to plant a seed, 10, 15 minutes a week to talk about team and family and how to have communication with each other when how to celebrate, how to deal with adversity. And I'm always tying it to performance, because I think, as you said, Sean, at the end of the day, helps everybody to reach their full potential. So I just think that, from my perspective, a place to start would be with the team, which is, again, defined oftentimes as family. That's the way most teams define themselves that way. What does that mean? Here are some examples of how we help each other celebrate. You see someone doing something Thursday, Friday, Saturday night that is not good for that person. Let's role play. Let's talk about ways to talk. Here's some symptoms for anxiety, stress, depression. Here's how to have those conversations. I just think if we use the time a little differently than we have, which with coaches, as well-intentioned as they are, and I've coached too, I get that, may have a discussion about this earlier in the year, but then in the guts of the season it becomes X's and O's. I just think if we change that dynamic, we'd make a lot of headway on this issue. That's just my opinion.
So you think there's a big role for the team itself? Yeah.
Very big role.
Yeah.
Very big role.
That's interesting.
I just want to add my experience. So last postseason, we brought in a company called Wells Performance, a guy by the name of Stuart Singer, and it was all about mindfulness and meditating and being where your feet are. And we would actually take time before practice. We would take 10 or 15 minutes before. We had a little gold line on the locker room, and before they'd run out on the court, they'd hit the gold line, and that would get them into their mode, their practice mode or their game mode. And the meditation, it did take time. We would take about 10 or 15 minutes prior to game time and prior to practice, and we had music in the background. There were certain phrases that we would say, and it was unlike anything I've ever experienced before. I'm going to be honest. It was, could we have been doing more layup lines? Absolutely. Could we have been working on our X's and O's more? Yes, but we felt as though we wanted to invest in this, and it wasn't in our budget. I'll be honest, we had to fundraise for it. So we're a Division II school, so we don't have that kind of money, but it was a couple grand. I think it was time well spent. We learned a ton as a staff, but most importantly, it taught me to be more intentional about how I speak to my athletes. And a lot of times as coaches, we want to react quickly, and that trickles down to your athletes. And so we kind of slowed down, and we used the phrase, be where your feet are. And I think mindfulness practice helped us out. Did it help us in the wins and losses? I don't know. But I do think that we were able to connect on a level that I know I've never connected with my team before. So definitely new for me, different. Do I believe in it? Yes. Do we have the money to keep going with it? I don't know. So I did learn a lot from it, though.
You know, one other thing, Dan, is I think it's a loaded question, right? Because you say if resources weren't an issue. If resources weren't an issue, we wouldn't be up here having these discussions and everybody would be resourced appropriately. But resources are an issue, whether it be time management, financial, or buy-in. You know, I think one of the things that, I'm not a paid endorsee, I have no conflict of interest, but UNC Greensboro utilizes a module-type system called My Playbook that's distributed to a lot of the NCAA institutions and that use those services to get a macro view of these types of topics: sexual assault, drugs of abuse, alcohol, sexual date violence, sexual identity issues, things like that, where it resonates because it's other student athletes that are having those conversations. We could all be up here on this panel as educated professionals and lecture all we want. If we had 5 peers up here, that would resonate so much more with that population, that 18 to 22-year-old population. So I think, you know, utilizing peer education and things like that, where it's not just somebody up there being told what to say because they were educated, but having those types of experiences. Ivy's blog probably resonates so much with people that were in the same situation, more so than I can say, well, this is my experience at a small, you know, Division I Big East Jesuit institution in the heart of DC. You know, that doesn't resonate. That does.
Yeah, I'll add to that. I mean, it's been amazing to finally find the strength in speaking up and speak with student athletes about my personal struggle, and I will definitely speak to that. It's amazing at the end of the speeches when students can come up to me and say, take out the 400, put in the 1,000, and that's me, or take out track and put in softball, and that's me. And so I think it is important that you're having people that are of similar ages that can come and talk about their personal struggle, and people can say, like, if you are struggling, and I know that I can get help, that recovery is possible, and there's something on the other side of this. So I think it's important that schools invest in having, whether that's a student that's actively at the school and wants to be open about their struggles, or someone that's a former student athlete at the school, or whatever the case might be. But I think having someone that's relatable to them, that really helps a lot for them to break down those walls.
Right, right. To do that as part of that education process at the beginning, if they have someone speak. And,
Exactly,
or someone like
exactly.
yourself come in, and which you do, by the way.
Yeah, I do. I go to
Just
school.
give you a little
Yeah,
plug. Come
I
on.
do. I go to schools and speak about my struggle.
Yeah.
To help
Coming
break
to
down
Adelphi next, right?
Yes, I'll be there on May 6th.
May 6th, be there.
So I'd like to say 2 things. So the first thing I'd like to say is that I think that everything that everyone mentioned is really important. I also think that as a healthcare system and as a country, we need to start making mental health care more like regular healthcare. I say this all the time, but you can come in and see me in the doctor's office for a $10, $15 copay because you sprained your ankle and you didn't even want to take an Advil for it. You just want to check it out and have a doctor make sure it's okay. And that's fine. That's great. I mean, it's important that your ankle feel well. But if you want to go talk to a counselor, a lot of times it's $300. It takes a month to get in. You know, schools need to take it seriously and get somebody who knows what to do when someone is truly in crisis on staff and available in a way that is useful. Saying, oh yeah, we can get you into our counseling center in a month, you might as well just punch that person in the face. It's a ridiculous thing to say. And so I really feel like we need to have those resources available. Doing the mindfulness may help somebody realize that they really have something going on, but once they realize it, they can't just go tell their coach or their friend. They need to be able to have a professional, in a lot of cases, who has that training that can help them. And I think that we really need to all wake up and make sure that person is available. The second thing that I want to say, is when we started this, I said that we're in a crisis. And, you know, when you said, what would the answer be? I thought, well, there's no answer. But one thing that I think I thought of when Ivy was speaking is, I don't think that I'm going to have to come up with the answer. I think that people like Ivy are going to come up with the answer. At Georgetown University, we didn't have a mental health specialist on staff that was part of athletics for most of the time that I was there. And then a student athlete graduated, and his parents said, you get to give a legacy gift. You can give $1 million or something to the school, and it can be for a room or a chair or.
It was less than $1 million.
Okay, I don't know. Whatever. I seem like a lot. So you can get something for your legacy gift. You can name this part of the library after, not the library, something after you. And he said, I want us to have a mental health person in athletics. 22-year-old kid. That's what he wanted.
He could have, he had a unique set of circumstances where this young man was somebody who struggled silently for 4 years. We had no idea. He came back after he graduated and he said, my family and I, we believe strong in philanthropy, and this is something that we want to do, and I just want to run it by you. And Blair and I looked at him and we were in shock. I didn't know, this was a kid that you never, ever would have suspected be in that situation. But he gave a significant, mindful gift back to the university that's going to impact everybody so much more than having his name on an auditorium, or which are important. I'm not taking away from that, but a building on campus or a gym floor or something like that. To have that type of perspective when you're 21 or 22 years old is amazing, and his family's amazing, and there's somebody that don't want to be recognized by name. But if you ask me afterwards, I'll tell you exactly who it is, so you can, do that.
Yeah. But it's people like him, it's people like you, Ivy. I think that, unfortunately, that they're the people that are going to eventually figure this out, and we need to make sure we're listening to our student athletes about what they need and how they best learn and how they best intake things. And, giving people a list of names may not be the best thing for them, but maybe a blog is helpful, maybe some sort of podcast or something like that. And so we really do need to listen to our student athletes and let them sort of lead us to an extent on this.
And Ivy, you might know this, are the SAC groups dealing with this a lot lately? Certainly, I was at a school 4 years ago, and this wasn't coming up much in that context, and a lot has happened in 4 years. And I'm sorry, do you want to?
I'm sorry.
Yeah, no problem.
I know at the Division I level it is, because that's something that the national SAC has pushed. I'm from NGIT, and we're in the ASUN conference, and in 2 weeks, our SAC is charged to do a social media campaign for a week as part of the ASUN SAC initiative. And we've been talking, and we're still trying to figure out exactly how we're going to navigate through that week. But it's something that's very much on the national SAC, and therefore at the grassroots levels, at the conference level, and where they're bringing it back onto campuses.
The SAC department at most of the institutions that I know of and have been employed at have the largest voice on campus with the athletic population. They get a day with our president of our university, the SAC department.
That's great.
The SAC committee does. And they put on the table all the things that they think that are important, and he listens. The one thing I'll say is SAC is very important. I would caution people, there's a big talk now, and Dr. Fish probably knows about it, Missy probably does too. The Power 5 institutions about 3 months ago came out with this this expectation that they all have mental health resources available. I would laugh at the NCAA who thinks that that is something that has any substance or teeth to it. If you read it further, it says that they have to have materials available to them, which could include pamphlets to distribute or posters to be placed at certain, places around campus. NCAA is not a big fan of me for those reasons. I'm outspoken about it. If they want to put something with teeth and resources to it, they should put their money where their mouth is and allow these institutions who, where Ivy was, had one full-time athletic trainer. One. For how many student athletes? And we're charging that one person to take care of every triage, every kid that comes through there. And oh, by the way, identify mental health situations, identify eating disorders, help to identify or get resources to their team physicians and things like that, who might have a physician on campus one day a week. then to put out a press release that says these Power 5 institutions have some grandiose idea of what mental health care is a joke. And I think it's irresponsible of the NCAA to accept that as something that they put out, and I think it's irresponsible of those schools to accept that that's what they want their legacy to be. So if you could edit that out before we put it in the package.
Well, so your suggestion or your advice would be what, as an alternative to that, then?
I think the NCAA needs to sit down and have a real heart-to-heart with the people, not the Power 5 institutions that have unlimited resources. There's, if you look at University of Michigan, they're the model. They are the absolute model. But why? Peer institution. It's a peer-to-peer institution that they've brought their SAC in. They also have unlimited resources in terms of dollar bills that they can throw at their issues, which is great. They're doing it in the right way. Where Ivy is, there's not that resource. There's not that expectation, but there's still that expectation that you have to meet where your feet are. That kid comes in, that one athletic trainer that's supposed to be out with basketball practice or football practice is in there for 2 hours taking care of this kid because they have nowhere else to turn on that campus. And it's really something that I'm passionate about. I think the Power 5 institutions need to start putting their money where their mouth is. It's not an NCAA issue. It's not. It's a peer institution issue. If we can all agree that we need to address it, how can we not address it?
Right. Any questions for any of these folks? What else do you see changing this? Anything?
There's a question.
Oh, yes.
One of the things that I know is a challenge is the stigma of being an athlete and dealing with depression. I have been taught a bunch of athletes here at my other schools and have been an athlete. The fear of coming out and saying that you're depressed or saying that you have anxiety, the fear of losing your position, losing your starting spot in the lineup or whatever. How do we get past that? Because to me, I think once we could overcome the stigma to the athlete, I think we're going to start to see more of this depression coming out and being more mainstream, if that's the lack of the right word.
I mean, it's a great question. I want to go back to, again, the power of team in all Division 1, 2, 3 schools. I saw something recently that really caught my attention. Do you know what percentage of teams, Division 1, 2, 3, football, golf, tennis, talk about being family, and I'll be there for you, and you'll be there for me, and I have your back, you have my back? What do you think? It's close to 100%. So let's talk about what family really means. I think we do it in the context of team. Family means learning how to celebrate together, but it also means how to help one another get through adversity. And by the way, I've learned that we all have a different definition of what family means, so we have to define what family is. We all come from different kinds of families, but I really do believe that, and this is who we are, this is what we do. And I think if we integrate it into what team means, 10, 15 minutes a week, I think it's wonderful to have forums where schools have it once a year. You have these education. That's terrific. It's a good start. But the team piece, sir, is really where I think if we consistently talk about team and family and what that means, including how you're feeling, what are you thinking, including, yeah, I have bad days too. I just think that normalizes emotion. I wouldn't want any emotion on a team to be the enemy. Anxiety, stress, depression, but we need to have a concept that still has meaning. And family and team is a concept that still is tremendously valued by today's student athletes. Just like it was 10, 20, 30 years ago. That hasn't changed. So I really believe if you begin to create a culture and define team and take time, inevitably you get around to being able to talk more honestly about depression. And it destigmatizes it. That's my thoughts.
And I think when you think about stigma, we have to think about the entire culture that's focused on it, the athlete piece, but then the family dynamics and the friend dynamics and any religious dynamics. So there's a lot of pieces that have to be broken down. There's a lot of conversations that need to be had. And I think for me personally, I had a lot of teammates that said all the negative things in the book about somebody that was struggling with mental illness. So it's really that trickling down of how do we have those conversations? How do we change healthcare so that people can have more access to getting therapy so that it becomes a more common conversation? If I can openly say that I have healthcare, health insurance that is allowing me to get therapy, then I can have that conversation. And because that was the push that I needed to get into therapy. I just had a conversation with a friend. She told me she was struggling, and then that helped me when she said that she was in therapy. That helped me to see that it wasn't this big, crazy, scary thing, and maybe I could try it. Maybe it could be helpful for me. But I think there's so many dynamics that need to be broken down. And I think this is, the first step is that there's conversations that are being had directly in athletics. But when we think about the athlete, we have to think about their parents and their cousins and their aunts and uncles. And if those people have ever struggled, and if their family has said, no, that's taboo, we're not going to talk about that person died by suicide, they just passed away, we're not going to have that conversation. We have to think about the family dynamic. We have to think about their teammates and how we can have all of those conversations and making sure that we're the best supportive. So I think it's an issue that has been stemmed for centuries, but we can start taking back that layer by focusing on the athlete and the individual themselves.
And I'll go one step further. I agree with everything that was just said, but I'll say in the last 2 to 3 years, that stigma has exponentially decreased. I think the one challenge that we have now is that we're identifying it. It's just like the concussion protocols, I think. We're not seeing an increase in concussions. We're seeing an increase in education and reporting. So right now we're seeing this spike. I think it will level off. I'm not certain that it's going to keep the exponential growth that we've had over the past couple of years, but the key is having the infrastructure in place to address what you identify as being the issue. At Georgetown, one isn't enough. We realize that, but it's what we have at the moment. It's something that we use community resources and campus resources to help supplement our services. But I joke around with everybody all the time, if you're not anxious before therapy, you will be after. Because when you get the $425 initial consult bill and you find out that your insurance company reimburses you $52 for that $425, it's a shock to your system. And you don't want to go because you're taking away from your family's vacation or something like that. So I agree with Blair 100%. Blair's one of the biggest advocates that we have on campus at Georgetown for our student athletes, for our students, to be able to do that. She was one of the ones instrumental in bringing it up to our campus department that then said, all right, we're going to put a supplemental fund in for each student athlete who is not able to be met at Georgetown University, needs are met, we'll give a $500 grant for them to go off campus. Those are things that I think build character within the community and let you recognize that there's an issue bigger than yourselves. We can't absorb it all. Dr. Fish can't, Missy can't, Ivy can't. As a teammate, as somebody who struggled, I just think that there has to be the continued conversation. And to be fair, outside the box thinking of how to do that. It's not just a $50,000, some money that's going to fix this issue. It's everything working collaboratively to come to an agreement on the best way to attack it.
Yeah, I think one of the worst ways to make a stigma worse would be to have somebody come up with the strength to tell you that they have a problem and then not help them, so it's really hard when you're the person that you do get asked for help and then you really have to stick with them and try to really fight the things that would stop them from getting help. And it's, even on a teammate to teammate level, somebody tells you that they're struggling, it can be hard to check in, but it could be helpful. It could make a big difference. If you say, did you end up going to the counseling center? Was it a terrible experience? Maybe you should tell Dr. Heike about it, and maybe she can come up with something else. Maybe you should tell Sean about it. Maybe he knows something else you can do if the counseling center didn't go well. So I think that, and the same thing with coaches, just assuming that a problem has been addressed because you made one recommendation may not be the best thing, because the way to make a stigma worse is to have somebody have a mental health issue and then not be able to get better, and then to just get worse, and now they've talked about it and they're just getting worse and worse and worse, and it can be really embarrassing. So definitely trying to make sure you complete the loop and get people the help they need.
Do we have other questions? Yes. Here we go.
So let me make sure I phrase this right. So I noticed that we talked a lot about infrastructure, especially being a key thing, but of course schools don't have a lot of resources for that. So I would want to focus more on culture. Any practices that you guys have done, have you seen affect other divisions outside of the athletics, even your student activities department or anything like that? And how do you stress the importance, or how can we make it more of an entire campus community to focus on mental health rather than just athletics? So I noticed one thing that Ivy said before was when she walked onto Caldwell, she saw a stigma-free campus. I graduated from Montclair State, so we had that all over, where inclusivity, stigma-free campus, that helps the campus community bring it together, but ultimately we want to change the whole culture of the campus community. What tips, suggestions, anything that you've noticed yourself on your campuses that have affected?
The short answer is you have to integrate your student athletes as students first. I'm a firm believer that if your identity is tied to being an athlete, then your community is the athletics program. You go to college as a student athlete for athletic purposes, but also hopefully for academic, excellence as well, whether it be at Montclair State or Georgetown or New Haven or Adelphi or wherever it is. You choose that because maybe Adelphi has a great major that you want, or Georgetown has the reputation that you want, or New Haven is, home and something like that. But the way that we've siloed athletics on campuses has been a definite detriment to that sense of community. And I think we're quickly realizing that we have 10% of our student population are student athletes. That's a significant portion of our campus that's a student athlete that we can then utilize to integrate within the campus community and bring in those people to say, hey, we're struggling with this. Our campus health center has adopted our athletics concussion policy. The collaboration with that across campus was something that showed academic resource that athletics takes academics seriously. So anytime you can collaborate that way, it breaks down that wall of this division between student athletes and students. And I think that's really the way you do it. You get your basketball team at Georgetown to go to a football game and sit in the student section and cheer them on the same way the football players do them. I think a lot of schools aren't there yet, unfortunately.
Any other questions? Is there anything else that you didn't get a chance to say on this topic, on the future of it, preventing it, addressing it, that you'd like to get in before we take a break here?
I just want to finish this in on a positive note here, because I think these conversations are happening more at the high school level and at the middle school level too.
Right. Yeah.
And that to me is really important, because we're getting people at the college level that have come through a system where competition is different, achievement is different. So there's forums going on for parents, sports parents and parents. I know I've been involved in professional development for teachers and faculty. I think the positive trend here is that at all levels, there's an understanding this needs to be addressed, and it needs to be addressed in a respectful way. So hopefully, over time, if we have that kind of programming starting early on, maybe the pendulum will swing back a little bit more towards a balanced understanding of the pressures we're putting on our kids, which to me, I think really is what this results from. And so that to me is encouraging.
And I'll say from the middle school level, I had to look at my phone because I want to make sure I put this title right, but sports specialization so early in life for these young men and women contribute to their identity as being a lacrosse player or a basketball player or a wrestler. So much so that if they go through their whole high school career and they don't get a scholarship, they think they're a failure. A lot of times, Blair and I talk about it often, these kids are broken before we get them, and in 4 years we're supposed to fix them. And those are ambitious ideals, but they're things that we want to, try to do the best of our ability. One interesting article came out this week that really resonated with me. I have a daughter who's OCD. Hard for me to talk about. Yale came out with a new study that said, new way to combat childhood anxiety, treat the parents. If you can't look inside yourself and say how you contributed to that or how you can help manage, I think you're doing a disservice. And I think people like Blair on this panel, sorry, get emotional, but if we can't look at ourselves and say we're contributing members of what's gone wrong, and we can't say we need to help fix it, and part of that fix is us, it's not everything else around us, it's us, I think we're not going to get there. It's something that I feel strongly about on campus, in our communities, nationally, that if we put a panel up here that has all the answers, we're just spinning our wheels. It's an exercise in futility. I think more studies like this need to be undertaken to really understand it at a micro level, instead of saying this umbrella of mental health is above us. How do we prevent it from cascading, and then get to the micro level and say, all right, well, here's the way I can individually help my situation on my campus, and most importantly, in my family.
Thanks for sharing that. But I definitely agree. I think that inner reflection is really important. I think also, going back to Blair's point earlier about you have to recognize that you make mistakes and you're wrong, and not owning up to that can be detrimental for other people around you and yourself. So I think a lot of times coaches have to also look at themselves, not only in their coaching style, but about their own personal struggles. What are they dealing with outside of them being a coach? And what is their identity, again, outside of being a coach? But what are they struggling with, and are they getting help? And I always use the expression, which I'm sure many of you have heard, but you can't pour from an empty cup. So you have to make sure that your own cup is full if you want to help your student athletes. So I think it's important that we all can do that inner reflection, whether we're a coach or a parent or a friend, or whatever it might be, a son, daughter, mother. You have to make sure you're doing that own reflection. And I know my mom always says she worries about that she had her own anxieties that she probably put onto me that she didn't even know were anxieties, but just things we didn't talk about. And so she thinks about what if she had gotten help back then, like what would have changed potentially for me growing up. So I think now that we are having these discussions, it's a prime time to look at ourselves. We're definitely looking at our student athletes and everyone around us, but what can we do for ourselves that's going to allow us to make a difference and help other people? So I think that's important too.
Great. All right. Well, I can't thank you enough. I'm sorry. Yes. Just
a comment. Just a comment. I think that all of what's been talked about this morning has been terrific, but I think maybe I'm bringing it down to a more basic baseline. And I think what's gone wrong in a lot of cases with teams, with individuals, is the fact that societally we have lost our track on how to communicate with each other. And that's been a problem caused by technology. I think what you're seeing with a lot of student athletes and coaches is communicating through these, instead of sitting across and actually learning how to handle an appropriate discussion when things are happening. And there will never be a substitute in my mind for human interaction, no matter how much we get into analytics or anything else. They're all wonderful, but human interaction is, to me, the basis of trust and caring. And when you have trust and caring, there can be great relationships between coaches and student athletes and administrators and coaches. and student athletes. Just a comment.
I agree. Emotion's not an emoji.
No.
You know, and I think what you're seeing is there's a very fine line between technology availability and interaction. We tried to ban cell phones in the training room, and that was brought up by our SAC committee that kiboshed that. So we literally have kids sitting from table to table texting each other instead of interacting with them. So what I do is I go stand in between them. And I say, oh, you can't say that, you know. So, you know, we encourage that type, but it's really something that I don't think you can, I don't know how to stop it. I think that ship has sailed. I think when, you know, I read an article about a year ago where a team would, before they got on the team bus, they would collect, they had the phone bucket.
Yeah.
And they would put all their phones in the bucket. And when somebody found out about it that didn't like it, that was quickly overturned. So where do your liberties end and your interaction begin? I don't know. But I guess having the conversation, that could be the next panel
All right.
discussion. You know?
Yes, yes, awesome.
We attempted to take phones away during meals as a team so we could have more family time and interaction. And it was an interesting experience because they didn't even know how to sit across from one another and keep a conversation for more than 5 or 10 minutes because there's that addiction, the constant worry. But I'm glad we did it. I'd like to continue doing it. I'd like to do it on a bigger scale, but I don't think you can do that nowadays.
Right,
It's their liberties.
yeah. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much. We're going to take a break here, but I really, really appreciate you folks being here and contributing to this conversation. Yes, yes, it's good stuff. All right.